Welcome to America Uncanceled. If you thought the crisis at the border was bad, you haven't seen anything yet. Title 42 is set to end on December 20th, which will further incentivize mass migration through the border. Of course, illegal immigration coming through the border. What does this mean for America? And will President Biden ever see the reality of the situation at the border? Joining us today to discuss the border crisis and more is founder and president of America First Legal and my friend, Stephen Miller. Stephen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here with you as always.
Great. Well, you have been really on top of this issue. If there's anyone that's an expert in this issue of what's happened at the border, it has been you. I got to see it firsthand when we worked at the White House together. We saw the breaking news of this huge migrant caravan with over 1,000 people crossing illegally through El Paso, Texas. I mean, it's the largest group that's gone through the border like that. What do you think why is this happening now? What's causing this?
Well, there's widespread awareness in the whole continent and really globally that this enforcement tool you mentioned, Title 42, is about to end. And so the Biden administration has systematically stripped away all the enforcement tools that President Trump put into place and has been steadily chipping away at Title 42 for the last 2 years as well. So the complete and total termination of Title 42 would mean that in a matter of days, there will be no enforcement tools or authorities in place at the border, meaning for all practical purposes, there will be no removals of anyone crossing the border illegally. The system can only handle, probably between 1,000 to 2,000 people a day, if everything is really moving smoothly. And it starts to buckle at numbers much higher than that. We're seeing that we know of about 8,000 people a day, or 4 times the capacity the system was built for. And then, of course, some other number of unknown gotaways that's significantly beyond that 8,000.
Stephen, so walk through, what does this Title 42 do? How was it first implemented under President Trump? Why would President Biden take this action to get rid of it?
So Title 42 is a long-standing public health authority, and the phrase Title 42 refers to its section in the U.S. Code that gives the president the authority to prevent anybody from entering the country for public health reasons. It's a very broad, very substantial delegation of power to the president. So we invoked it at the beginning of the pandemic to obviously prevent the spread of COVID, because there's no reason why you or I or anyone we know should get COVID because an illegal immigrant is coming into the country. And obviously the southern border is a uniquely unsafe area for many diseases because of the unsanitary conditions associated with human smuggling. So you could apply this not only to COVID, but you could apply it to any number of different diseases. The Biden administration, and it gives you the ability not just to remove people, but to remove them very quickly, very efficiently. The Biden administration has been chipping away at Title 42, removing groups from Title 42 for the last 2 years because they impose enforcement as an ideological matter. So the Biden administration's ideological position is that people who cross the border illegally ought to, in most cases, be released into the United States. And that's what they've been doing. But because they've been sued by attorneys general for their open borders policies, they've been somewhat restrained in their ability to remove Title 42. And so they have been trying to get rid of it, and they finally found a judge who's basically doing them the favor of getting rid of it. And instead of appealing to the Supreme Court and trying to get emergency relief, they're just going along with it. So this is what they've wanted all along. They've wanted to be free of Title 42. And so because they got rid of Remain in Mexico, because they got rid of the Safe Third agreements, because they got rid of all the asylum reforms we put into place, without Title 42, there will be nothing left. It will be a total chaos.
So is it catch and release? Is that going to be is that their border security approach?
That's what it's going to be. They're going to give directions to border agents to more quickly, efficiently, and rapidly release everyone into the country. So as we know, they've already engaged in catch and release for 2 years, and millions have been released. But some portion of people have been subjected to Title 42. With that gone, everybody's going to be released.
I read here that since the Trump administration imposed Title 42 in March 2020, migrants attempting to enter the U.S. to claim asylum have been sent back to Mexico more than 2.4 million times. After the ban lifts, more of them will be allowed in to pursue asylum claims. But explain this part of it, because it's asylum claims, but these guys released, the illegal immigrants released into the interior of the country, and then there's a huge backload, of cases, of legal cases. So when are their asylum cases going to be heard in the courts?
Yeah, so the asylum thing is all just a pretext. It's completely fraudulent. So for one thing, the thousands of people they're releasing have not had any kind of hearing or any kind of test or any kind of examination to determine whether they're eligible. It literally goes like this. Border Patrol picks up a group of 300 people, hands them a piece of paper, and releases them. No one is investigating or even attempting to investigate any validity or any credibility behind any of this. The migrants know it's a scam, the smugglers know it's a scam, the border agents know it's a scam, the Biden administration knows it's a scam. Now, in theory, not in practice, but in theory, what would happen is 7 years later, you would show up at a federal building in downtown San Antonio and explain you left Guatemala because you've been persecuted for being God knows what, because there is no persecution in Guatemala. And claim will be rejected, and you'll be told, at a time of your own choosing, please go home. And you'll promptly take that paper notice, you'll shred it up, and you'll go back to your house where you've since had 3 U.S.-born children. You're not going anywhere. So it's the whole thing is completely, like I said, it's completely pretextual. The Biden administration knows it's a scam. The migrants do. Everyone involved in it does. This is just routine economic illegal immigration, and the administration is using the pretext of asylum to justify these mass.
So, Stephen, you've been tweeting about Stop the Omni. This is obviously talking about the omnibus bill. We know that it looks like the Democrats are going to try to push this forward as we get to the end of the year. And so give us a reason, why is this omnibus bill so important to make sure it doesn't pass this lame duck session?
Well, this whole thing is just inexplicable to me. So the House of Representatives has changed hands. There's now a conservative majority in charge of the House to enact conservative policies. So why, in the name of the Lord, you would have people in the Senate who call themselves conservative helping Chuck Schumer pass a giant, big government, socialist, woke spending bill and deprive all of these new House lawmakers a chance to have any control over government policy for a full year after taking office. It is an act of legislative sabotage. And of course, one of the many issues that if you had a short-term CR to February, you could legislate would be the border crisis. So they're guaranteeing autopilot on open borders, on woke indoctrination in our schools, on woke policies in our military, on crazy gender policies at HHS. They're putting all this on autopilot for a year and saying to the new House majority, sorry, we cleared the decks before you even got here.
Well, and it really is a Democrats' last chance of pushing through just this insanity of an agenda.
And every one of them will vote for it, Mercy.
Yeah.
You'll know it's a bad bill because every liberal in the Senate will vote for it. All of them will. That tells you all you need to know about what's in there. Bernie Sanders and all of them are going to say, this is wonderful, I'm voting for it.
Right. No, it's a big challenge as we're going through this. I do want to ask you, though, as the new House Republican majority, they take charge of the House of Representatives, it looks like one of the things they're going to be working on is the investigations on what's happening at the border. They've talked about many of these congressional members about impeaching Mayorkas. Is that doable? Is that going to happen?
I think it's one of the most important things for them to do. Me and you, we're big believers, it's no secret, in the United States Constitution. And that is the supreme law of the land. It's what governs everything that happens in our system of Republican government, small r, Republican government that our founders gave us. If you have a cabinet secretary who is ignoring, indeed violating, an entire body of law on a systemic basis on purpose, how do you not impeach them? Think of any other issue. Imagine you had a Treasury Secretary who said, I hereby abolish all tax laws, just not collecting taxes. Now that would be, we probably would enjoy that a lot more than open borders. But the point is that that person would be impeached in 24 hours. You go through the departments. Imagine you had a Republican administration where you had some Republican head of HHS, Health and Human Services, who said, I'm just unilaterally block granting Medicaid. I know Congress never passed a law block granting it, but conservatives always wanted the block grant Medicaid, so I'm just doing it on my own. They'd be impeached in 24 hours. Mayorkas wanted to pass a new immigration law. He could have done so, but he didn't. And he doesn't get to make his own laws. You have to.
Let me ask you, though. It feels like Mayorkas has very little power or little say on what's happening in the administration. I mean, I've never seen an administration where the Secretary of Homeland Security and whether they're colluding with Kamala Harris, who's supposed to be the border czar, and then you have the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, where they don't even admit that there's a border crisis. And whenever there's any quote unquote problems with the border, they actually blame it on the Trump administration.
Yes. I mean, obviously they're engaged in, to use a popular term these days, they're engaged in a degree of gaslighting that I think
word
there's
of
no...
the year, gaslighting.
Yes. There's no parallel for in modern history. I mean, this would be like a fire department showing up at your house, in which it's basically in a raging inferno, everything's falling apart, turning to ash, saying, I don't think there's anything to see here, folks, let's move on, false alarm. I mean, this is the worst border crisis in the history of any country, not just our country. There's no parallel for it. You can check France, England, Italy, like nothing comes even close to what we're dealing with. Hungary, nothing comes close. And for them to lie about it so brazenly tells you that they're so confident that they have corporate media at their back so they can get away with lies like this. Those kinds of lies in any other context would get called out, but they know that NBC, ABC, CBS, Washington Post, New York Times are going to let them do it. Obviously, this policy is being run out of the White House. Obviously, it's being run out of I would probably speculate, the Domestic Policy Council in the White House. But at the end of the day, Mayorkas, in front of Congress, has defended, advocated for, articulated all of these policies, repeated all these lies. The border is not open. The border is secure. The border is closed. And at the end of the day, if we don't send the message, look, none of us can say what will happen in the Senate. If we don't send the message that the House will impeach a cabinet secretary who's shown contempt for the laws that he swore an oath to uphold, then we are inviting every single future administration that shares this ideology to do the exact same thing.
I do have to add, because when we were in Mexico for CPAC Mexico, Matt and I met with these victims of human trafficking, these young girls ages 9 to about 17 years old. It was completely heartbreaking. And I think we lose perspective of the victims involved because of these weak border policies that we have currently in place. I mean, it's clear that the drug cartels and the human traffickers are very much in control of our border. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, here's the sentence you'll never hear. No one would ever say, we should abolish the police department in a major American city and let the mafia run all of the major activities, and this will be really good for human rights. Well, that's what we've literally done on the border. We said we're going to abolish law enforcement. Border Patrol has no legal authority here. Customs has no legal authority here. ICE has no legal authority here. Well, guess who does? The cartels. They make the decisions. They set the policies. They put the wristbands on the people to show that they are basically bought and owned by the cartels. In other words, they've paid money to the cartel. They've been assigned a wristband based on where they're entering and which cartel they've paid. So the cartels are in complete control. And of course, that means rape. It means slavery. It means labor trafficking. It means physical and psychological abuse and torment on a scale that has no parallel anywhere else in the Western, modern, industrialized world right now. So that's a mark of everlasting shame on this administration, that they are allowing the cartels to profit off and proliferate human misery on a massive scale. And all of these liberals in Congress that pretend to be humanitarians should be crying with shame at what they have helped come into being. They are complicit in the industrialized abuse and torment and torture of young boys and girls, especially young girls.
Let me ask you, we know that Mayorkas went to go visit with some Border Patrol agents in El Paso. I don't think that went I don't think it was a very productive meeting. We're seeing a number of these border agents which have committed suicide, left these jobs. I mean, the morale for the Border Patrol agents, I think, is just, they've suffered incredible I think just stress with what we've seen happen with the current administration. You know many of these Border Patrol agents. What's your sense when you talk to them? What are you seeing on the ground?
Yes, morale is at rock bottom, and it has been for some time. It can't get any lower, honestly. They feel neglected, underappreciated, not listened to. They're put into incredibly dangerous situations they should not have to be in, as evidenced tragically by the border agent who died in the line of duty recently during a chase. There's been an incredibly violent, unstable, chaotic situation at the border, and so they're risking their lives in a thankless environment, and they're being vilified by the administration. Right. The whipping incident, the fake imagined whipping incident being the most famous example of this, where Biden and Mayorkas went after these poor agents who had done absolutely nothing wrong whatsoever and concocted this false tale. And suicides that you're seeing are obviously an indication, the most heartbreaking kind, that our border agents have been failed in the most personal and most heart-wrenching way imaginable. And again, if there was any conscience at all on the part of Biden's allies in Congress, you would think they'd be the first ones rushing out to help these agents, but they're not, because at the end of the day, apparently, there is no price in human suffering they are not willing to pay to facilitate their radical immigration agenda. And again, I can't think of any other example in which a major American political party has so openly embraced such lawlessness and such chaos on such a colossal scale.
One last question here. The U.S. government is suing Arizona over these shipping containers on the border with Mexico. They were going to use these shipping containers as a barrier on the border, and the U.S. government saying, well, you're trespassing on federal lands. Where does that end up?
The levels of irony there are very hard to unpack. The trespassing that's occurring is, of course, by the cartels and the people that they're smuggling. And Arizona is trying to protect its sovereign territory. But it really goes to underscore, I don't know how that will turn out ultimately. It's in the Ninth Circuit, so it's obviously an unfavorable circuit for Arizona. But it proves the point, right? Every time that Trump went to court, it was to uphold the law against a suit saying we basically want open borders. Every time Biden's gone to court, it's because he's saying, I want open borders, I want to let more people in, and somebody's trying to stop me from doing that. And so that tells you everything you need to know. Biden only goes to court to make our borders more open. Trump only went to court to make our borders more secure.
Well, Stephen, I really appreciate your insight. I think we're in a very precarious time right now, and just watching what's happening at the border is just an absolute disgrace. And hopefully we will see some change sooner rather than later. What do you think the House members can do to slow down this process and to see if we can have some sort of border security? Obviously, when you have this, this checks and balances, but it just feels like not much can be done. What do you think?
Well, if the Senate was if Mitch McConnell was actually trying to help, you would do a short-term CR to February, and then in February you would attach very clean, very simple border security measure to it that importantly would be a restriction on Biden from catch and release. In other words, you would prohibit catch and release. That's what you need. You need to tie his hands. Biden doesn't need more authorities. Biden needs more restrictions on his behavior, right? He's a rogue president, and you have to tie him down legislatively. And that would be a fight that I think you could win, given how many people in the Senate are going to be up for re-election in the next cycle. Now, if they don't get that chance, and it looks like they're not going to, the best you can do is to hold these very high-profile hearings, hopefully in prime time. You pursue the impeachment inquiry, you raise holy hell, and hopefully somehow, some way, you're able to get to the point where you can get a bill that gets 60 through the Senate that accomplishes the same thing I'm talking about, which is tying Biden down. Failing that, you're not going to have another opportunity until the budget expires next year.
Well, I hope Mitch McConnell listens to your advice on this, because it's much needed. Yeah, wouldn't that be great? Well, thank you, Stephen, so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And remember, we've expanded to the podcast world, and you can listen to America Uncanceled with Matt and Mercedes Schlapp wherever you get your podcast. We'll see you next time. God bless.